I'd like to share a story with you from my second book, Critters, Woods, and Water. And I wrote this story back in the day when I was spending most of my time in the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas in the one-room school and writing stories and songs. But then to make my living as a storyteller, I would travel to Central Florida where my mom and dad lived, and they were gracious enough to put me up so I could do my work in the Polk County schools in Central Florida. Well, one of the best parts about being home with my mom and dad is they loved to fish, and my dad had a small boat, and my mom and dad would go out onto the many lakes in Central Florida. But my mom had this dog, and his name was Fred. He was some kind of a terrier, and he was a nice dog, but I just always thought my mother spoiled this little mutt rotten. So anyway, one time we went out on a boat trip on the Withlacoochee River in Central Florida, and this is after I had met my girlfriend Julie, and who became my wife. This was in the early days, and we had actually gone so I could introduce them to my mom and dad on this trip on the Withlacoochee River. But anyway, I decided to take that experience and turn it into a story, and it's called Fred and the Gators. And the story goes like this. Now, being a dog isn't easy. I mean, take me for instance. I'm one of those short little terriers, with the short leg and the long tail and the hair poking out all over the place. But, the family I live with, they're good to me. Well, the mother and father are good to me. It's the oldest son in the family who's the garbanzo, because at supper time, when I'm under the table, sitting on my tail to stifle my enthusiasm, the boy would say things to me like, "Fred, stop begging." Or he'll say, "Fred, why don't you go eat your own food?" Well, that's easy for him to say when he stuffs his face with pork chops and rice. Me? I've got to go over to my dog dish and eat some modern artificial glop made out of toxic waste by a scientist who's overpaid in a basement. One of my friends came over once. He raided my dog dish before I could stop him. They had to take him out on a stretcher. Next time he came over, he had duct tape wrapped around his nose. Well, the family, whenever they went on their boat on the lake, they would always take me with them, which was more fun than a chunk of meatloaf. But one time, we went on the Withlacoochee River with the boat, but they wouldn't let me in the boat. Not because of me, but because of the wildlife. Not the anhingas or the manatees, but the alligators. Somebody had spotted a 12-foot alligator at the end of a dock, and so the mother of the boat would not let me get in for a ride, which was okay with me, because when I heard that story, I had nightmares about squashed dog meat and big teeth. Well, everything was going well, because when the mom and dad went out on the boat, on the river, they'd leave me in the motorhome, which was fine with me, because they'd leave a little fan on, and they'd have the radio on. It was that station where that same music that you hear at the vets before they stick you with the needles. But as soon as they would leave, I'd get the newspaper, I'd jump up on the couch, and then I'd just change the channel to Rock Your Big Ears Off. Well, it was all going well until the son showed up with his girlfriend. They were nature lovers, the dangerous kind, because the first morning they were there, I was under the table. The mom and dad were cooking, and I was just dozing to the smell and the sounds of popping bacon grease. And that's when the dad said, "Okay, let's get cleaned up and let's get out on that boat. So Fred, let's go, boy." But before I could move to go into the safety of the motorhome, the son intervened on the side of wildlife. He said, Sit, Fred. So I sat. And the boy said, Mother, isn't Fred going out on the boat? Fred always goes out on the boat. And his mother replied, absolutely not, Ricky. Your father's friend, Ralph Franklin, he told us a story last week where a friend of his took his dog out on a boat on a river in Florida. The dog saw an exotic bird and barked. As soon as the dog barked, alligators came from everywhere. They followed that boat around for hours. And then later, when the dog jumped off the boat to go for a swim, the alligators came up and ate the dog. The boy, who had a college education, he said, Mother, that's a good story, but it's ridiculous, Mother. Look, alligators are reptiles. They're nothing but big lizards. They're ancient. They don't have enough brains to follow a boat all day just because a dog barked. And he said, besides that, he said, watch this. He said, Fred, do you want to go out on the boat, boy? I barked, woof, which meant, are you kidding? Listen to your mother. He said, see, Mom, Fred wants to go. So he picked me up and he chucked me in the boat. Well, it was all right. I mean, we were having fun. We had food, we had chips, we had drinks, we had bird guides, we had binoculars. And I was sitting on the floor of the boat keeping a low profile. I wasn't licking, panting, scratching, making any sounds like a dog. And that's when the father said, hey, look at the size of that Doberman Pinscher in the boat coming this way. Well, I'm a curious dog, so I jumped up on the bow to catch a glimpse of this canine Arnold Schwarzenegger. But then when the boat came up alongside of our boat, I looked into the Doberman Pinscher's eyes, and through silent dog lingo, I communicated, look, Mac, whatever you do, don't bark. Alligators will come from everywhere. But when the Doberman Pinscher spotted me, he went, "Roar!" And I thought, swell, all brawn, no brains. But that's when we came to a small side stream. The father turned the boat into that stream, and that's when we noticed an old swamp oak had fallen across that stream, making a natural bridge. Now we could go under it, but everybody would have to duck. That's when the son, in front of his girlfriend, decided to strut his stuff. He walked to the front of the boat and said, all right, everybody, watch this. I'm going to practice my quick exit boat survival technique. When the boat went under the tree trunk, the boy reached up, he threw his arms around the tree trunk, he wrapped his legs around the tree trunk, and then he hugged himself to the bottom of the tree trunk so the boat would go out from underneath him, which it did. But I could see that the boy had not read the fine print in the survival manual that says, if you're going to climb out of a boat onto a tree trunk, make sure the tree trunk is not so big that all you can do is stay stuck to the bottom. I could see the only place that kid was going was off. His mother yelled, Ricky, don't fall in. Didn't you hear that dog bark? There are probably alligators everywhere. The boy called back, Mother, will you forget about the And then he lost his grip, push, right into the water. I was having so much fun. I hadn't had this much fun, so I saw him fall off his bike when he was first coming off of those three-wheelers. Anyway, I was just there. The mom was scratching me behind the ear like she often did, and I was relaxing, and then she almost yanked my right ear off when she screamed, Alligator! alligators! Just then we all looked over the bow. Here come about 40 alligators off the banks into the water, swimming right toward the boy. The boy screamed, "Mother, do something!" Well, the mother, she wanted to save her son. She jumped up on the bow. She looked around till she saw a length of rope. She grabbed the rope. She threw one end to her son, and she wrapped the other end around her wrist. I'm only a dog, but I have an elementary grasp of physics, forces in motion. I knew this relationship was not going to work, because as soon as the boy grabbed onto his end of the rope, like any normal human being who's about to be eaten by 40 alligators, he just pulled on his end of the rope as hard as he could. So instead of him coming up out of the water, he pulled his mother off the boat and into the water. Ah! Well, that was my best friend. I jumped up on the bow to see if I could help. But I didn't stay there very long, because I began to hear these voices coming over the bow of the boat. Voices that were saying things like, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to be eaten alive." Somebody said, "Throw me a knife." And then somebody yelled, "Throw Fred in as a sacrifice." That's when I dove off the bow of the boat and slid under the seat. Well, now, the girl wanted to save her boyfriend, so she jumped up on the bow of the boat. The dad wanted to save the mom. He jumped up on the bow of the boat. The dad looked around till he saw an oar standing there, so he picked up that oar and shoved it over to his wife. But when he did, he bumped the girl. The girl began to lose her balance. To steady herself, she grabbed onto the back of the oar. So when the girl went over, she took the old man with her. Ah! Now all 4 human beings, the whole family, was in the water with the alligators. I was the family dog. I had to do something. I jumped up on the bow. I looked down into the water. There they were, 4 human beings, 4 pair of eyeballs, arms and legs thrashing in the water. Great big eyeballs, big teeth, long jaws, swimming right toward them. So I thought, "Fred, you got to do something, boy. Consider your options." Well, number 1, I could get behind the wheel, start the engine, and go for help. Number 2, I could just walk to the back of the boat, open up the cooler, reach in there, grab the ketchup bottle, throw it overboard, and say, "Have a nice lunch, fellas." Or I could create a diversion. So I ran to the back of the boat. I let out 3 diversionary woof, woof, woofs, and then I dove off the back of the boat. By the time I hit the water, I was already in a full-speed Olympic dog paddle. I took off across that river. Those eyeballs and those jaws were right behind me. I climbed up on the bank just as the biggest set of alligator teeth this side of the Amazon, bam, slammed closed behind my tail, but he missed. There was an old swamp oak with a great big old crotch in it. I jumped into the crotch of that old oak tree and I looked down. There were all 40 alligators with those eyeballs and jaws snapping at me, but they couldn't get me because I was safe. So I looked back to see if maybe those human beings with all their brains had maybe followed my example and swam to the other shore and climbed up into the trees on the other side. But did they climb up into the trees and swim to the other side? No. All 4 of them were still in the water, frantically swimming downstream, trying to catch up with the boat. Well, about an hour later, I knew the family was coming back for me because I could tell from the things they were saying. Somebody was thanking the Almighty and somebody was cursing the Doberman Pinscher. And they stood down at the bottom of the tree, so I climbed down. And that's when the dad said, "All right, we survived the alligators, but now how are we going to get back to that campground through this snake-infested Florida swamp?" That's when the son offered, "Why don't we send Fred?" I wanted to say, "Why don't you send Tarzan?" But the boy said, "Okay." He said, "Look, Fred, you want to go for help, boy?" I barked, "Woof," which meant, "Fat chance, Garbanzo." He said, "See? Fred wants to go." So the girl had an old piece of paper and a pencil. She wrote a rescue note and they stuffed it under my collar. The boy pat me on the head. He said, "Good boy, Fred. I knew we could count on you." I barked, "Woof," which meant, "Thanks a lot, pal." Well, I took off for the campground. Didn't take me long to get there, and when I did, when any normal dog would have gone to the first person in sight for help? Not me. I went to the manager's office, not to get the manager or to use his telephone, but to find this sheet of paper and a pencil so I could sit down and write my side of the story before those people were discovered and had a chance to tell their side of the story. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed Fred and the Gators. I sure had a good time writing that story and telling and sharing it. And of course the experience it came from was pretty entertaining as well. I'd like to move a little away from that Florida swampland now and go back to the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. And years ago there was a presidential election cycle coming around, and in those days I thought, at that time I was old enough, I was over 35, I could run for president and maybe I should. So I thought, I'll write a little song so people kind of know what I stand for. And here we are again in a contentious time politically, and presidential elections coming around, and now who knows, maybe this is my time to step up and run for president. But if I'm going to do that, then you need to know what I would do and what I stand for, and so maybe this little song will give you some idea about my platform if I were the president. If I were the president, I'd get me a horse. I'd sneak out of the Oval Office and go riding in the forest. I'd hide from my bodyguard, give the slip to the CIA. I'd put the windows back in schools and feed my horse some hay. If I were the president, da-dee-da-dum, da-da, da-dee-da-da-da-da-da-dum, da-dee-da-dum, da-da. If I were the president, I'd give away my cars. I'd get me a pickup truck, forget the trip to Mars. I'd close down the Pentagon, make friends with the KGB. But you always have to know who to trust, so I'd live up in a tree. If I were the president, da-dee-da-dum, da-da, da-dee-da-dum, da-da-da-da, da-dee-da-dum, da-da. If I were the president, I'd get me some boys. I'd send them off to foreign lands with grains and wooden toys. Marines could pack alfalfa sprouts, engineers could guide the mules. The paratroopers could stay at home, we'd conservate the fuel. If I were the president, da-dee-da-dum, da-da, da-dee-da-dum, da-da-da-dum, da-dee-da-dum, da-da. If I were the president, I'd build up lots of farms. I'd gather nuclear scientists and lock them in the barns. Grizzly bears and human beings would be safe in the dark. And everyone could live in peace if their dogs just wouldn't bark. If I were the president, now that is what I'll do. And when I run for president, I hope to count on you. You.